Hello everyone. Today I'm going to talk about, I'm going very quickly here. Today I'm going to talk about a keybind that is so powerful. It's basically mandatory to have if you want to play the game competitively. And it's so powerful, in fact, that players sometimes even talk about banning it outright because it can impact what you can do so heavily. And what's noteworthy as well is this is not a default key that's bound, like, you know, something like plus attack or plus attack 2, which obviously are very important to have. No, this is something you have to kind of manually assign. And yeah, it wasn't always kind of discovered, I suppose. But once it did, you know, once it was found out, basically, it became very popular, as you can expect. The key I am talking about is the load item preset bind. Now, you can have 4 of these, 1 for every loadout that you have, and I believe in conjunction with a advanced option or something like that, that makes you resupply when you change your loadout. Well, with a load item preset bind, you will resupply if you change to the loadout you're already on without even altering it. So what this lets you do is many things, but on the surface of it, all it does is make you resupply in place. So if you are weak and you want to walk into spawn and just get full health, maybe the locker's a little bit far away, once you're at the door, you know, in spawn at any capacity, then you can hit this bind and you get resupplied. Full HP, full ammo, you just get put into a spawn position. And notably as well, is that it actually restores crit heals. So in some ways, resupply binding is actually more effective than just touching the locker. Like if you're a soldier on last, for example, in disad last, let's say you just spam the door and traded some damage out. Maybe you even got a kill on the flank player, but of course you have to get health. So you're going to jump back to spawn and get health. Well, if you hit your resupply bind, which I may also call interchangeably with the banny bind, because that is also what it gets called colloquially. Kind of funny how competitive players just call a lot of things the banny whatever. You have the banny bind, the banny config, whatever. So yeah, you hit your banny bind, your resupply bind, and now you have crit heals that you wouldn't have otherwise had, and it's very easy for you to get buffed as a result afterwards. And resupply binds are useful outside of competitive, for that matter. Even in casual play, just the quality of life of being able to quickly resupply and get full HP and ammo upon entering the door without having to walk over to a locker, and restoring crit heals in the process, very, very nice to have. On top of the fact that it makes it easy to swap between loadouts if you have multiple resupply binds set, as I do on my different number keys corresponding to all the different loadouts, so I can easily switch between them without having to mess around in my inventory, stuff like that. So it's definitely quality of life improvements, but I want to talk about how strong it is in a competitive metagame, because it's quite powerful. In notably a few circumstances. Certain things that it just doesn't let you do otherwise. So, as I mentioned earlier, restoring crit heals is something you just can't do otherwise. So that's one thing. But another thing is just escaping on last. If you are, for example, a heavy revved in the door on last and you take 200 damage from their Uber, you can just resupply bind and teleport away. A lot of the time, there's going to be a difference between when you would have been able to retreat into spawn, as in actually being able to run away and have the shutter close behind you, and just teleporting out of there. Because there's plenty of times where a player is fully in the spawn, but the shutter hasn't quite closed yet, and a rocket or a sticky is able to slip past and kill that medic, or kill that demo retreating into the spawn. But if you resupply bind, not something you have to worry about. You just teleport away to a very safe spawn position, and you're totally fine. You're not caught. This is one of the primary grievances people have with it. And when I say this, like when I say people sometimes want this banned, very, very small minority. But it's an opinion people have nonetheless. That, yeah, it's stupid that a player can be caught and just kind of get bailed out by the resupply bind. Another thing worth mentioning as well is that it can be inconsistent because it is dependent on the item servers. So in some cases, like many of you trying to switch a weapon and it just doesn't happen, and then 10 seconds later or something it does, that can happen with resupply binds. Sometimes you can press it before you even enter the spawn, because there's going to be maybe a half a second or a second delay, and by the time you're in the spawn you're resupplied. There are going to be times where it just doesn't work for like 5 seconds, and then it happens 4 times because you just kept pressing the button when it wasn't responding. So it can be a little inconsistent, but most of the time it's it behaves relatively normally. But yeah, it is dependent on the item server. So item servers having issues, then your banny bind is going to be having some issues, which can be irritating. But nonetheless, still very useful to have for being able to kind of escape death in situations like that. And I know, in fact, certain maps were broken, notably Badwater was broken, in that you could resupply bind in the other team's spawn. So if you were, I forget exactly where it was. I think it was like right at the start of the map. If you were a defending player pushed up against the door of the blue spawn, you could resupply bind all the way back to your own spawn and basically escape danger from, out in the middle of nowhere, just right in front of the other team's spawn, which is amusing. I don't know if that's still the case, but for that matter, you could resupply bind on the head bug on Upward as well, most likely. So interesting applications there. But another really important aspect of the resupply bind, that this is probably the reason why it's like, well, there's so many reasons why it's just so useful to have that you pretty much need it, or rather there's no reason not to have it. But one of the big ones is the fact that dealing with forward spawns and back spawning is so much easier. And it's very, very easy to, for example, if you fight a mid-fight and your team wins but you die, most of the time you're going to spawn before your team can cap, which means that you want to get forward spawns. You don't want to walk out of the spawn that you got only to have, halfway between where you spawned and the forward spawn, your team caps mid, and you could have just been faster by waiting for the forward spawn. So in cases like that, you can just wait and spawn, and then guess what? Hitting your resupply bind after your team caps the point updates your spawn to the new one, and now you have just teleported forward and get to push from the forward spawn. Now, these are things you can achieve by just like switching weapons or switching hats, with that advanced setting I was talking about with the resupply on loadout change. But it's much less convenient. You kind of have to fumble around. It's going to be slower than just hitting a key that you've bound to load item preset and then updating your spawn. This is important for back spawning as well. If you are, let's say, on sniper in a forward spawn and you take the peek, whether you hit the shot or not doesn't really matter for this example, but you get pressured. You take some spam. You don't want to be in that forward spawn anymore. The other team has capped the point, so your active spawns are now further back. In a case like that, hit the resupply bind, and you're totally fine. You get to back spawn and come out full HP in the spawn that you wanted to be at. Although I suppose with the sniper example, you can just switch off of sniper and it would update your spawn in that respect. But the point's clear here. There's so many applications to being able to just on-demand respawn when you're in a spawn zone. It's extremely useful, from either escaping death to playing, more seamlessly around spawn positions changing, because spawn positions change pretty frequently in 5CP. You are getting forward spawns or back spawns with almost every point that gets capped. So as a result, one team is getting a spawn update with every point that gets capped, but nonetheless, it's of course very important. So as a quality of life and also a meta game and just advantage to have over your teammates, Resupply binds, basically mandatory. And when whatever, yeah, it's mandatory, and that's totally fine because it's the easiest thing in the world to set up. It's literally just one command. It's no different than binding your movement keys to different keys, stuff like that. But it's just very useful to have, and as you can tell, a lot of reasons to have so. Reasons to have it, including, and the crit heals thing as well is something that I don't think players do enough. They just waddle over to the locker as a soldier when now hitting the bounty bind is pretty much always better because you get those really important crit heals to have as a soldier. But anyway, I think that's probably all I have to talk about. The resupply bind, very important to have set up, and really like nice quality of life to have, even like casually as well for that matter. Just really, really convenient to be able to on demand hit a button and respawn. Yeah. So anyway, hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you all next time.